For decades, Gansbai on the South African coast was famous for one thing: great white sharks. So many of them that it was called the Great White Shark Capital of the world. Tourists came from every country to cage dive there. Researchers built careers studying the animals that dominated those waters. The sharks had held that territory for years, possibly generations. Then, in 2017, they left, not gradually, not seasonally. The departure was immediate and abrupt. Tagged sharks scattered within hours, sometimes vanishing for weeks or entire months. Marine researchers checked the water temperature, they checked the food supply, they checked for human interference. None of it explained what was happening. What they eventually found was described as a fear-induced mass exodus. The lead researcher compared it to wild dogs abandoning the Serengeti when lions appear. Except the great white shark is supposed to be the lion. Something had moved into those waters, something the sharks recognized and ran from. That thing was two orcas, two individuals, known by name, port and starboard, recognizable by the distinctive kinks in their dorsal fins. Since 2017, at least 8 great white sharks have washed ashore following their attacks. 7 had their livers removed. 1 had its heart taken too, not torn apart, not scattered, surgically extracted with a precision that researchers are still trying to fully explain. And when the sharks that survived realized what was in the water, they didn't fight. They ran. An entire bay of apex predators gone because 2 orcas had arrived. But why does the presence of orcas change the behavior of entire ecosystems? Today, we descend into the world of the most feared creature in the ocean, the orca, and the intelligence behind the fear it creates everywhere it goes. Beneath the surface, survival is shaped long before anything is seen, carried through signals that move quietly and continuously through water, forming a kind of awareness that does not rely on thought or hesitation. What appears from above as calm movement or sudden absence is, at its core, a response built on recognition, a process refined over countless generations, where reaction comes not from emotion, but from the need to continue living within an environment that rarely allows mistakes. In this world, what might be called fear is not a feeling in the way it is understood on land. It does not linger or grow, and it does not overwhelm. It exists only as a shift, a precise adjustment in behavior triggered the moment a pattern aligns with danger. Muscles tighten, direction changes, depth increases, and energy is conserved or released with exact timing. There is no pause to interpret, only a movement that follows a signal already understood long before the moment arrives. These signals travel in ways that extend far beyond sight. Sound, in particular, becomes a primary thread, moving efficiently through water across distances that stretch beyond immediate surroundings. Low frequencies pass through entire regions, carrying information that does not need to be decoded consciously. Vibrations follow, subtle disturbances that ripple outward from movement, each one leaving behind a trace that can be sensed by bodies tuned to detect even the faintest shift. Alongside these, chemical cues drift in slow currents, remnants of injury or stress that mark the presence of disruption somewhere nearby. Together, these elements form a layered system of awareness. A fish does not need to see what approaches if the water itself has already changed. A seal does not wait for direct contact if the surrounding environment begins to feel different in ways that have always preceded danger. Even predators built with strength and speed are not separate from this network. They, too, listen, adjust, and withdraw when patterns suggest that the cost of remaining may outweigh the reward. Risk in the ocean is rarely taken without calculation. Energy is limited, and injury carries consequences that cannot be easily recovered from. A single mistake can mean the inability to hunt, to migrate, or to escape the next threat. Because of this, most predators do not pursue blindly. They choose carefully, guided by signals that indicate vulnerability or safety. When those signals shift, even the most capable hunters alter their behavior, not out of hesitation, but from a deep alignment with survival itself. Over time, these responses do not remain isolated within a single species. Patterns repeat, and repetition becomes recognition. A behavior that proves effective is observed, mirrored, and gradually integrated across different forms of life. Young animals follow the movements of older ones, absorbing reactions before understanding their cause. In this way, knowledge spreads without language, carried through action rather than instruction, shaping entire populations that may never directly encounter the original source of the behavior they now follow. The ocean, then, operates as a network of continuous exchange, where information is embedded in movement, sound, and presence. Much of this exchange remains unnoticed from above, too subtle or too diffuse to be easily measured. Yet within it, entire ecosystems remain connected, responding not only to immediate events, but to patterns that echo across distance and time. What unfolds is not chaos, but coordination without a central guide, a system where survival depends on the ability to detect, interpret, and act within moments that pass almost as quickly as they arrive. Each reaction becomes part of a larger rhythm, one that defines how life persists in a place where visibility is limited, but awareness extends far beyond what can be seen. Along the southern coast of Africa, where cold currents meet warmer flows, and life gathers in dense, shifting abundance, a long pattern of observation had settled into something predictable. Large sharks moved through these waters with consistency, following routes that had been traced and retraced through years of tracking. Their presence shaped the rhythm of the region, steady and expected, forming a kind of continuity that researchers had come to rely on as they studied movement, feeding, and territory. That continuity began to fracture in ways that did not follow any known environmental change. Tagged individuals, each one carrying a quiet signal beneath the surface, started to behave in ways that diverged sharply from everything recorded before. Instead of maintaining their established paths, they accelerated, turning away from familiar grounds with sudden direction. Movements that were once measured became abrupt, covering distance with an urgency that had no clear trigger in temperature, current, or prey distribution. Data streamed in with a clarity that left little room for uncertainty. These were not isolated incidents. Multiple sharks, tracked independently, displayed the same pattern. Their routes stretched outward, leaving behind areas that had supported them for years. Some dove deeper than usual, descending rapidly, as if seeking distance in a vertical escape, while others moved laterally across vast stretches of coastline, increasing speed beyond what was typical for routine travel. The timing carried a precision that made the pattern difficult to dismiss. Departures occurred within narrow windows, as though the signal prompting them had reached each animal within the same span of time. There was no gradual decline in presence, no slow redistribution. The change was immediate, a collective withdrawal from regions that had once been central to their behavior. What followed was not a brief disruption. Days passed, then weeks, and in some cases months, without return. Monitoring stations that had once recorded frequent signals began to fall silent. The absence was not partial, but complete in certain areas, leaving behind spaces that had lost one of their defining inhabitants. Researchers who had spent years building an understanding of these populations found themselves facing a gap that could not be easily explained through known ecological factors. Marine biologists began to examine every possible variable. Water conditions were measured and compared against historical baselines. Prey availability was assessed, with surveys showing no sudden collapse that might drive such a departure. Human activity, often a source of disruption, did not align with the timing or scale of the movement. Each explanation, when tested against the data, failed to fully account for the speed and coordination of what had occurred. The significance of the event lay not only in the movement itself, but in what it implied about the behavior of animals often considered dominant within their environment. These sharks were not responding to gradual pressure or shifting resources. Their reactions suggested the presence of a factor capable of overriding established patterns almost instantly, a signal strong enough to alter decisions that had once appeared stable and predictable. As more data was gathered, the pattern repeated. Additional individuals exhibited similar departures under comparable conditions, reinforcing the idea that this was not an anomaly, but part of a larger behavioral response unfolding across the region. The consistency across separate tracking records added weight to the observation, drawing attention to the possibility that something within these waters had introduced a level of risk that even apex predators recognized and avoided. In the quiet spaces left behind, the ocean continued its motion, currents flowing as they always had, smaller species adjusting in ways that were still being understood. Yet within the data, the shift remained clear, preserved in lines and coordinates that marked the moment when presence gave way to absence and when a familiar pattern dissolved into something far less certain, leaving behind a trace of behavior that would continue to be studied long after the movement itself had passed. There are encounters in the ocean that leave behind almost no movement, only a body that tells a story long after the event has passed. Along certain coastlines, sharks have been found drifting or settled on the seafloor, their form largely untouched, their mass intact, yet marked by a single absence so precise that it reshapes how the entire encounter is understood. These discoveries did not emerge from chance alone, but from repeated patterns that began to align across separate observations. In multiple documented cases, large sharks were recovered with clean openings near the pectoral region, an access point that revealed a removal carried out with remarkable accuracy. Inside, one organ was consistently missing, the liver, rich in oils and energy, a dense reserve that represents a significant portion of a shark's internal mass. The rest of the body showed little sign of prolonged struggle or consumption, suggesting that the interaction had been brief, controlled, and highly selective. This pattern, once recognized, began to connect with sightings of a different kind of predator moving through the same waters. Orcas, already known for their adaptability, were observed engaging sharks in ways that did not resemble chaotic pursuit. Instead, their approach carried coordination, a positioning that allowed them to control the shark's movement before the final moment. Reports described individuals working in tandem, guiding the shark into orientations that limited its ability to respond. One method, recorded through both direct observation and inferred from physical evidence, involved forcing the shark into a state known as tonic immobility. By turning the animal onto its back, the orca could induce a temporary paralysis, a biological response that renders the shark motionless. In this state, even a powerful predator becomes still, its usual defenses suspended, its capacity to counterattack diminished to near absence. What follows is not prolonged conflict, but a short window in which precision becomes possible. The extraction itself reflects an understanding of anatomy that appears refined through repetition. The orca positions its body with controlled pressure, using strength not to overpower in a sustained struggle, but to maintain just enough stability to access a specific region. A swift opening grants access to the liver, which is then removed without the need to consume surrounding tissue. The efficiency of this action suggests a learned behavior, one that has been practiced and transmitted within certain groups. For the shark, there is little capacity to defend against such a sequence. Its design, built for forward motion and sudden bursts of speed, offers limited protection once its orientation is altered. The rigidity of its body, so effective in pursuit, becomes a constraint when control is lost. Its bite, formidable when directed, cannot reach behind or beneath with the same effectiveness, leaving it vulnerable in positions it rarely encounters naturally. As more cases were documented, the consistency of these findings reinforced the connection. Marine biologists began to compare recovery sites, timing, and known movements of orca groups, finding overlap that supported a shared cause. The absence of the liver, repeated across multiple specimens, became a signature, a marker of a specific interaction rather than a random act of predation. In the stillness that follows such encounters, the ocean resumes its motion, currents shifting around what remains. Yet, within the pattern of these discoveries lies a clear indication of a predator capable of altering the balance between species that once seemed unmatched, not through prolonged dominance, but through moments of precise intervention where knowledge, coordination, and physical control converge into an outcome that leaves behind a quiet, unmistakable trace. At first, the change presents itself as a gap, a space where activity should continue but does not. Instruments record normal conditions, currents maintain their direction, and the surrounding environment holds no visible sign of disruption. Yet within that stability, something begins to thin out. Movement that once filled the water column recedes, not in scattered bursts, but in a quiet, collective withdrawal that leaves behind an unusual stillness. In regions known for constant activity, this absence becomes especially clear. Areas that once supported dense interactions between species begin to feel unoccupied, as if a layer of life has been carefully lifted away. Small fish no longer gather in their usual formations, mid-level predators fail to appear along expected routes, and surface disturbances diminish until even subtle ripples become rare. The structure of the ecosystem remains intact, but its motion has shifted into something far less visible. Researchers monitoring these locations initially turned to familiar explanations. Environmental fluctuations were the first consideration, with attention placed on temperature shifts, oxygen levels, and the influence of changing currents. Data was compared against historical baselines, searching for anomalies that might account for the sudden decline in presence. In many cases, the measurements returned within expected ranges, offering no clear indication of a physical cause. Attention then moved toward resource distribution. If prey had relocated, it would naturally draw predators away, creating the appearance of absence while preserving the underlying balance. Surveys were conducted to assess biomass and feeding patterns, yet these too failed to reveal a consistent driver. In some areas, food remained available, untouched in ways that suggested not scarcity, but avoidance. As observations continued, a pattern began to emerge that extended beyond a single location. Similar disappearances were recorded across distant regions, separated by vast stretches of ocean, yet displaying the same sequence of change. Active ecosystems would enter a period of reduction, followed by a sustained absence, and then, after an interval, a gradual return. The timing varied, but the structure of the event remained consistent, repeating with a rhythm that hinted at a shared cause. This repetition shifted the focus of investigation. Rather than searching for isolated environmental triggers, scientists began to consider the possibility of a mobile influence. something capable of passing through multiple ecosystems and producing the same response each time. Tracking data from various species was re-examined, not as independent records, but as overlapping narratives that might reveal a connection. Within these layered observations, correlations began to form. The periods of absence aligned with the movement of a particular presence, one that did not leave obvious traces in the water, yet carried enough influence to reshape behavior across different levels of the food chain. The response was not limited to a single species, but extended through entire communities, suggesting that the signal prompting this withdrawal was both strong and widely recognized. What had once appeared as isolated anomalies now formed a coherent pattern, one that could be followed across oceans through the quiet intervals it left behind. The absence itself became a form of evidence, a negative imprint that marked the passage of something not always directly observed. In these moments, the ocean did not lose its structure, but its expression changed, shifting into a state where presence gave way to caution and activity folded inward until the conditions that caused it had moved on. Gradually, as time passed and the influence receded, life would return. Movement resumed, patterns reformed, and the visible structure of the ecosystem reassembled itself with a familiarity that suggested resilience. Yet within the data, the memory of the absence remained, preserved in the timing and scale of each event, offering a quiet record of how entire systems can respond in unison to a force that leaves little behind except the space it briefly creates. Mass in the ocean often suggests security, a presence that moves with slower certainty, carrying strength that seems difficult to challenge. Large bodies displace water with quiet authority, their scale alone shaping the space around them. For many species, reaching such size reduces the number of threats they must consider, allowing movement across long distances with fewer interruptions. Yet there are moments when this advantage becomes less absolute, when scale no longer determines outcome in the way it once appeared to. Encounters between orcas and larger whales reveal a different structure of interaction, one not defined by direct comparison of size, but by the way movement is organized across multiple individuals. Rather than approaching as a single force, orcas arrive as a coordinated group, each member adjusting position in relation to the others, forming a shifting arrangement that surrounds and guides the larger animal. Their motion is not rushed, but deliberate, maintaining pressure over time rather than relying on a single decisive moment. Within this arrangement, the larger whale continues to move, using its strength to push forward, to dive, or to change direction. Its tail generates powerful thrust, capable of accelerating its body through water with significant force. Yet the group remains distributed, preventing escape through constant repositioning. Individuals take turns approaching, then withdrawing, maintaining a balance that reduces fatigue within the group while gradually increasing it in their target. The focus of the interaction often settles on specific areas of vulnerability. Orcas direct their attention toward fins, toward the tail, and toward regions that influence movement and breathing. By disrupting these points, they begin to limit the whale's ability to maintain speed or control its direction. Repeated contact, applied with precision, weakens the effectiveness of the whale's defenses, not through overwhelming force, but through accumulated interference. Time becomes a central factor in these encounters. What begins as an initial engagement can extend across long durations, sometimes lasting for hours. The group maintains its presence, adjusting pace and position as needed, allowing the process to unfold gradually. The larger whale expends energy in attempts to break free, while the orcas conserve theirs through coordinated rotation. This difference in energy management shifts the balance, turning endurance into a decisive element. As the interaction continues, the whale's movements change. Its dives become shorter, its turns less controlled, and its capacity to generate sustained force begins to decline. The group responds to these changes with subtle adjustments, closing distances when resistance weakens, then easing pressure when necessary to maintain control. The process remains structured, each movement contributing to an outcome shaped over time rather than achieved in a single instant. The final stage reflects the same pattern of precision seen in earlier moments. Once control has been established, the group directs its actions towards specific targets, often focusing on areas that provide the greatest return of energy. The scale of the whale, once an advantage, becomes less relevant within this controlled environment, where coordination and persistence have already defined the outcome. Across these encounters, the role of size shifts from dominance to limitation. A larger body requires more energy to sustain movement, more oxygen to maintain activity, and more time to recover from disruption. In contrast, the group distributes effort, sharing the demands of the interaction across multiple individuals. This distribution allows them to maintain pressure without reaching the same level of exhaustion, gradually reshaping the balance through time and coordination. In the broader rhythm of the ocean, these interactions remain part of a system where advantage is not fixed, but dependent on context. Strength, speed, and scale each hold value, yet none operate in isolation. When combined with coordination and learned behavior, even the largest forms can be guided into outcomes that reflect not a lack of power, but the presence of a different kind of precision, one that unfolds steadily until the difference in size no longer determines the result. It begins as a subtle deviation, a movement that does not match the rhythm that came before it. A single fish alters its direction without completing the arc it had already begun. A seal pauses before surfacing. A shark shifts its depth without committing to a full dive. These changes are small, almost unnoticeable in isolation, yet they carry a precision that reflects something already understood beneath the surface of awareness. Within moments, that first adjustment does not remain alone. Nearby fish respond, not by scattering in chaotic bursts, but by aligning into tighter formations or slipping downward in coordinated descent. Their bodies turn almost simultaneously, each movement influenced by the one beside it, creating a pattern that travels outward through the group. The water column begins to reorganize itself, layers compressing as individuals reposition in response to signals that have not yet produced any visible disturbance. Seals, positioned between surface and depth, register this shift through a different set of cues. Their ascent slows, their path bending away from open exposure. Some descend with controlled urgency, while others alter their route entirely, choosing distance over proximity. The change in their behavior is neither random nor delayed. It occurs with a timing that suggests recognition, as if the conditions now present align with patterns they have encountered before. Further below, sharks adjust in ways that reflect both caution and calculation. Their movement, usually deliberate and consistent, becomes more direct, angles sharpening as they leave areas that once offered reliable opportunity. Some increase speed beyond their usual range, while others descend, choosing depth as a form of separation. These responses differ in form, yet they share a common direction, away from a source that has not yet entered view. What unfolds is not a series of isolated reactions, but a chain that connects across species, each one influencing the next. The shift in fish behavior alters the environment for those above them, removing familiar cues that seals rely on to gauge safety. The absence of seals changes the surface patterns that predators observe, creating a feedback loop that continues to expand. Each reaction becomes both a response and a signal, carrying information forward through movement rather than sound or contact. This process moves with remarkable speed. Within a short span of time, entire sections of the ocean adjust their behavior, not through communication in the way it is often understood, but through shared sensitivity to change. A turn in one direction becomes many. A descent becomes a layered withdrawal, and the visible structure of activity begins to dissolve into something less defined. The precision of this response suggests that it is not learned in the moment, but carried as an embedded pattern, shaped through repeated exposure over generations. Young individuals mirror the movements of those around them, absorbing reactions without needing direct experience of the cause. In this way, recognition spreads, not through instruction, but through participation, becoming part of the baseline behavior that governs survival. As the chain continues, the space itself begins to reflect the change. Areas that once held overlapping paths of movement become simplified, each species creating distance in ways that reduce interaction. The complexity of the ecosystem remains, but its expression shifts, compressing into quieter forms that carry less risk. What remains most striking is how quickly this transformation unfolds, and how little is required to initiate it. A single deviation, aligned with an internal pattern, becomes the starting point for a broader adjustment that extends far beyond its origin. Through this process, the ocean demonstrates a form of awareness that does not depend on visibility, where recognition moves ahead of contact, and where the first sign of change is enough to reshape the behavior of many at once. A single body moving through water carries intention, but a group moving together carries structure, a layered arrangement where each individual contributes to something larger than its own motion. In orcas, this structure is not temporary or formed only in moments of need. It exists continuously, shaped by relationships that persist over years, sometimes over entire lifetimes, creating a framework within which every action, including hunting, takes place. Pods are not random gatherings, but stable social units, often centered around matrilineal lines, where knowledge passes from older individuals to younger ones. Within these groups, familiarity develops into coordination, and coordination becomes predictability. Each member learns not only how to move, but when to move, adjusting its behavior in response to subtle changes in the group's formation. This shared understanding allows them to operate with a level of precision that does not rely on constant signaling, but on recognition built over time. During a hunt, this structure becomes visible through the distribution of roles. Some individuals position themselves to guide or redirect, moving along the edges of the target's path to influence its direction. Others approach more directly, applying pressure in short, controlled intervals before withdrawing. There are those that remain slightly removed, observing and adjusting the overall formation, ensuring that gaps do not open and that the arrangement remains intact. Each position carries purpose, and the transition between them occurs fluidly, without interruption to the group's collective motion. Timing plays a central role in this coordination. Movements are not simultaneous in a uniform sense, but staggered with intention, creating a sequence that maintains constant engagement without overwhelming any single member. As one orca advances, another prepares to take its place, allowing the group to sustain its effort while distributing energy across individuals. This rotation reduces fatigue and preserves the ability to respond over extended periods, turning endurance into a shared resource rather than an individual burden. Communication within the group extends beyond sound alone. Body orientation, changes in speed, and shifts in spacing all contribute to a continuous exchange of information. A slight adjustment in trajectory can signal a change in strategy, while a coordinated acceleration can close distances at precisely the moment required. These cues, often too subtle to be noticed from outside, form the basis of a system that allows multiple individuals to act as a single, adaptive unit. The effect of this teamwork becomes most apparent when considering how it alters the dynamics of a hunt. A single predator must rely on its own speed, strength, and timing, constrained by its individual limits. In contrast, a coordinated group can surround, redirect, and sustain pressure in ways that no solitary hunter can achieve. The target is not simply pursued, but guided into positions where escape becomes increasingly difficult, each movement narrowing the range of possible responses. This collective approach also allows for flexibility. Different prey require different strategies, and the group can adjust its formation accordingly. Some hunts involve tighter coordination, with individuals operating in close proximity, while others spread across larger areas, creating a broader field of influence. The underlying structure remains consistent, but its expression shifts to match the conditions, reflecting an adaptability rooted in shared experience. Over time, this system of cooperation becomes refined, each generation inheriting patterns that have proven effective. Young orcas move within the group, observing and participating, gradually aligning their actions with those around them. Through repetition, they become integrated into the structure, contributing to its continuity while also shaping its future form. Within this framework, hunting is not an isolated act, but an extension of social organization, where success emerges from alignment rather than competition. The group moves as a coordinated whole, its strength defined not by the power of any single individual, but by the precision with which many can act together, sustaining a process that transforms the balance of interaction in the surrounding waters. Before movement begins, there is often a period where nothing appears to happen, a quiet interval where positions settle into place and spacing becomes intentional. In these moments, the arrangement of bodies reflects more than proximity. It suggests preparation, a subtle alignment that precedes action, where each individual occupies a position that will later define the flow of the encounter. What follows does not unfold as a sudden impulse, but as a sequence shaped by anticipation. Orcas approach hunting with patterns that repeat across time, not as rigid routines, but as frameworks that can be adjusted depending on context. Observations across different regions have shown that specific techniques are used consistently when targeting particular prey. These techniques are not isolated to single events, but appear again and again, carried through generations as behaviors that have been refined through experience. The repetition itself becomes a form of knowledge, preserved in the structure of the hunt. Execution begins with controlled movement, often maintaining a distance that allows for observation without immediate engagement. The group adjusts its formation gradually, narrowing space while avoiding abrupt shifts that might trigger early escape. Each step in this process builds upon the last, creating a progression that guides the target into a position where options become limited. The transition from preparation to action is smooth, without a clear dividing line, as if the hunt has been unfolding long before it becomes visible. Adaptation plays a central role in this process. Different prey require different approaches, and the same group may shift its behavior depending on the characteristics of what it pursues. When interacting with fast-moving fish, coordination tightens, movements becoming more synchronized to manage rapid changes in direction. When targeting larger marine mammals, spacing expands, allowing for sustained engagement over longer durations. These adjustments are not random, but reflect an understanding of how each type of prey responds under pressure. In some cases, behaviors emerge that suggest a level of problem-solving beyond simple repetition. Instances have been recorded where orcas modify their approach after initial attempts do not produce the intended outcome. They reposition, alter timing, or introduce new elements into the sequence, refining their actions within the same encounter. This flexibility indicates that the hunt is not fixed at its outset, but evolves in response to unfolding conditions, guided by an awareness that integrates past experience with present observation. The learning process underlying these behaviors extends beyond individual encounters. Young orcas participate alongside more experienced members, observing the progression of each stage while gradually taking on more active roles. Through this exposure, they begin to internalize the structure of the hunt, not as a set of instructions, but as a series of patterns that can be recognized and applied. Over time, these patterns become part of their own behavior, contributing to the continuity of the group's strategies. Evidence of this learning is visible in the consistency with which certain techniques are maintained within specific populations. Different groups, separated by geography, develop distinct approaches that align with the prey available in their environment. These variations persist across years, suggesting that knowledge is not only acquired, but retained and transmitted within the social structure. The hunt, in this sense, becomes a cultural expression, shaped by the history of the group as much as by the immediate conditions. Within this framework, instinct remains present, guiding fundamental responses, yet it is layered with experience that refines and directs those responses into more complex forms. The result is a system where action is informed by memory, where each movement carries the influence of previous encounters. Planning and execution merge into a continuous process, one that unfolds with a level of precision that reflects both adaptation and continuity, allowing the group to engage with a wide range of challenges while maintaining a cohesive approach shaped over time. Long before bodies draw near, the water begins to carry traces of their presence, not through disturbance or motion, but through vibration that travels steadily across distance. These vibrations move in patterns that extend far beyond the immediate area, threading through layers of depth with a persistence that allows them to reach places where no visual cue could arrive in time. Within this medium, sound becomes more than communication. It becomes a form of presence that precedes arrival. Orcas produce a range of vocalizations, each shaped by frequency and structure that determine how far it will travel. Lower frequency sounds extend across greater distances, spreading outward through the water with minimal loss, while higher frequencies remain more localized, offering detail within closer range. These sounds are not isolated pulses, but sequences that carry rhythm and variation, forming patterns that can be distinguished from the surrounding acoustic environment. Water itself serves as an efficient conductor, allowing these signals to move faster and farther than they would through air. Temperature layers, salinity, and pressure create pathways that can guide sound across vast stretches, bending its trajectory in ways that extend its reach. In certain conditions, a single call can travel for miles, maintaining enough integrity to be detected by organisms attuned to its frequency. This capacity transforms sound into a wide-reaching signal, one that connects distant points within the ocean. Other marine species exist within this acoustic field, continuously receiving information carried through these vibrations. Fish, equipped with sensory systems that detect pressure changes, register shifts in the water that correspond to distant movement. Seals and other mammals interpret sound through hearing, that is adapted to underwater transmission, allowing them to distinguish between different sources with precision. Even species that rely less on hearing remain sensitive to the subtle changes in pressure that accompany these signals. Detection does not require full clarity. A fragment of a pattern, a familiar frequency, or a sequence that aligns with previous encounters can be enough to initiate a response. Recognition occurs at the level of pattern rather than detail, allowing species to react even when the source remains far beyond visible range. This early detection creates a temporal advantage, providing a window in which movement can be adjusted before direct contact becomes possible. Within this system, sound functions as an early warning, not through intention, but through its inherent properties. The presence of orca vocalizations alters the acoustic landscape, introducing patterns that stand apart from the baseline noise of currents, shifting sediment, and distant biological activity. These patterns, once recognized, trigger adjustments that ripple outward through multiple species, each responding according to its own sensitivity and experience. There are also moments when the pattern changes, when vocalizations reduce or shift in frequency, altering how the signal moves through the water. In these intervals, the absence of expected sound can carry its own significance, creating a contrast that is detected as readily as the presence of noise. The acoustic field becomes dynamic, shaped not only by what is produced, but by what is withheld. Through this continuous exchange, the ocean maintains a form of awareness that extends beyond direct interaction. Sound travels ahead, carrying fragments of presence into areas not yet reached by movement. Species respond to these fragments, adjusting their behavior in ways that align with patterns learned over time. The result is a system where information flows through vibration, linking distant points into a shared field of perception. In this field, visibility is no longer the primary means of understanding. Instead, recognition moves through sound, arriving early, spreading widely, and shaping behavior long before bodies come into view. Not every approach announces itself through vibration. There are intervals when the surrounding water carries less information than expected, when familiar patterns of sound recede and the acoustic field becomes thinner, as if something has withdrawn its signal rather than extended it. In these moments, the absence itself begins to hold meaning, a shift that is not defined by what arrives, but by what is no longer present. Orcas, capable of producing complex vocal sequences, do not rely on sound at all times. During certain phases of a hunt, they reduce or completely cease their vocal activity, moving through the water with minimal acoustic output. This transition alters how their presence interacts with the environment, removing the early traces that would otherwise travel ahead of them. Without these signals, the distance between detection and contact becomes narrower, compressing the window in which other species can respond. Movement continues, but it changes in quality. The group maintains coordination through proximity and visual alignment, adjusting position with careful control rather than through audible cues. Each individual remains aware of the others through subtle shifts in speed and direction, preserving the structure of the group without introducing additional disturbance into the surrounding water. This form of coordination allows them to remain connected while reducing the likelihood of detection. At the same time, their attention turns outward through passive listening. Instead of projecting sound, they receive it, interpreting the acoustic environment as it unfolds around them. Every movement made by other organisms generates vibration. Every change in pressure leaves a trace, and these traces become sources of information. By remaining silent, orcas enhance their ability to detect these faint signals, distinguishing patterns that might otherwise be masked by their own vocalizations. This approach introduces a different dynamic into the interaction between predator and prey. Species that rely on early acoustic cues find themselves without the signals they have come to associate with approaching danger. Their responses, shaped by patterns of sound, do not activate in the same way when those patterns are absent. The environment appears unchanged, even as a presence moves through it with increasing proximity. Avoiding detection in this manner does not require speed or sudden force. It depends on restraint, on the ability to withhold action until the conditions align. The group maintains its formation, adjusting slowly, allowing distance to close without introducing disturbances that would trigger immediate reaction. In this controlled state, the boundary between awareness and contact becomes less defined, narrowing the margin within which escape might occur. The effectiveness of this silence lies in its contrast to expectation. In an environment where sound carries information across vast distances, the absence of that information alters how signals are interpreted. A lack of disturbance can be perceived as safety, allowing normal behavior to continue even as conditions shift. Within this gap, the orcas move, guided by cues that remain available to them while staying beyond the perception of others. As the encounter progresses, the balance between sound and silence becomes part of the overall strategy. There are moments when vocalization resumes, when coordination through sound becomes necessary again, and others when it fades, returning the group to a state of minimal acoustic presence. This flexibility allows them to adapt to changing conditions, using sound when it benefits the interaction and withholding it when it would reduce their advantage. Through this interplay, silence becomes more than an absence. It becomes a deliberate state, one that shapes how information flows through the water and how other species respond to what they perceive. In these intervals, the ocean carries less signal, yet within that reduced field, movement continues with precision, guided by awareness that does not depend on being heard. The first indications did not arrive as a clear discovery, but as a series of small irregularities within records that were otherwise steady and predictable. Researchers working across different regions had grown familiar with the rhythms of the animals they studied, patterns of movement that repeated with enough consistency to form a reliable foundation. When those patterns began to shift, the change was subtle at first, easy to interpret as natural variation rather than something requiring deeper attention. Early observations came from isolated datasets, each one collected with its own purpose, often focused on a single species or a specific location. Tagged animals provided streams of information that mapped their positions over time, tracing paths that revealed feeding grounds, migration routes, and resting areas. Within these maps, deviations began to appear, not as random dispersals, but as coordinated changes that occurred within narrow timeframes. Individuals that had followed consistent routes for extended periods suddenly altered direction, leaving areas that had previously supported stable activity. At the time, these changes did not immediately align into a broader pattern. Researchers compared the data against environmental variables, examining shifts in temperature, salinity, and current flow. Each possibility offered a partial explanation, yet none accounted for the speed or uniformity of the movement. The deviations were too synchronized to be dismissed as coincidence, yet too disconnected in their initial presentation to suggest a single cause. As tracking technology advanced, the resolution of these observations improved. Devices became more precise, capable of recording not only location, but depth, speed, and variations in behavior over shorter intervals. This increase in detail revealed that the changes were not gradual adjustments, but abrupt transitions, moments where movement shifted sharply from one state to another. These transitions occurred across multiple individuals, often within the same period, creating clusters of activity that stood out against the background of normal behavior. The growing body of data began to attract closer examination. Researchers revisited earlier records, aligning timelines from different studies and comparing them across species. What had once appeared as isolated events started to form connections. Patterns that were recorded in one location showed similarities to those observed elsewhere, even when separated by distance. The alignment was not exact, but it was consistent enough to suggest that the same underlying influence might be at work. Initial interpretations remained cautious. Scientific understanding relies on evidence that can be repeated and verified, and the emerging pattern required careful validation. Teams considered the possibility of unknown environmental factors, subtle changes that had not yet been measured. They examined the influence of human activity, from shipping routes to fishing pressure, searching for correlations that might explain the observed behavior. Each hypothesis was tested against the expanding data set, yet the pattern persisted without a clear environmental trigger. As more species were included in the analysis, the scope of the observation widened. Fish, marine mammals, and large predators all displayed variations in movement that aligned within similar periods. The differences in their biology and behavior made this alignment notable, as each species would typically respond to its environment in distinct ways. The shared timing suggested that the cause was not specific to one type of organism, but operated across multiple levels of the ecosystem. Gradually, the separate strands of data began to converge. Researchers who had been working independently found that their observations overlapped, forming a network of evidence that extended beyond individual studies. Conferences and collaborations brought these findings together, allowing patterns to be compared directly. What emerged was a clearer picture, one that transformed earlier confusion into recognition. The pattern, once fragmented, revealed itself as a coordinated response, not confined to a single species or location, but distributed across the ocean in ways that reflected a shared sensitivity to change. Within the data, the ocean's behavior could be seen not as a collection of independent movements, but as an interconnected system, where shifts in one part resonated through others, creating a structure that had been present all along, waiting to be understood through the accumulation of observation. Across distant oceans, the same species moves through entirely different patterns of behavior, as if shaped by separate histories that unfold within the same body. Orcas that share a common form do not always share the same methods, and over time, these differences have become structured into distinct ways of living that persist across generations. What appears uniform from a distance reveals itself, upon closer study, as a collection of populations guided by their own learned traditions. In some regions, orcas move along coastlines with a focus on fish, navigating currents where schools gather in dense formations. Their movements are precise and repetitive, following seasonal shifts that align with the availability of their preferred prey. In other areas, groups travel broader routes, targeting marine mammals with techniques that differ entirely in pace and structure. These variations are not temporary adjustments, but stable patterns that define how each group interacts with its environment. The distinction between these groups extends beyond diet. Hunting methods, vocal patterns, and social interactions all reflect the specific context in which each population exists. Orcas that specialize in fish often display tighter coordination during feeding, their movements synchronized to manage rapidly shifting targets. Those that pursue larger prey exhibit strategies that unfold over longer periods, with spacing and timing adapted to the scale and behavior of what they hunt. Each approach carries its own rhythm, shaped by the demands of the environment. These differences are not dictated solely by instinct. Young orcas learn by remaining within their group, observing and participating in the activities that define daily life. Through repeated exposure, they absorb the techniques that have proven effective, gradually aligning their behavior with that of the adults around them. This process allows knowledge to persist, not through genetic change, but through continuous transmission within the social structure. Over time, these learned behaviors form what can be understood as culture, a set of shared practices that distinguish one group from another. This cultural layer influences not only how orcas hunt, but also how they communicate and move through their habitat. Vocalizations, for instance, can vary between populations, creating patterns that are recognized within the group but differ from those used elsewhere. These variations reinforce the separation between groups, maintaining distinct identities even within overlapping ranges. Specialization further deepens these differences. Some populations focus almost exclusively on a narrow range of prey, refining their techniques to match the specific challenges presented by that choice. This specialization increases efficiency within a particular context, yet also creates dependence on the continued availability of that resource. The group's knowledge becomes finely tuned, allowing them to operate with precision within their chosen niche. The persistence of these patterns across time suggests a stability that extends beyond immediate conditions. Even when opportunities to shift behavior arise, groups often maintain their established methods, continuing to operate within the framework they have inherited. This continuity indicates that the learned structure itself holds value, providing a reliable approach that does not require constant reinvention. Interactions between different populations reveal the depth of these distinctions. When groups encounter one another, their behaviors do not always merge or adapt in response. Instead, each continues to follow its own established patterns, maintaining separation even within shared spaces. This coexistence highlights the presence of multiple systems operating within the same environment, each guided by its own history and experience. Within this diversity, the concept of a single, uniform predator becomes less defined. Orcas exist as a network of cultures, each one carrying its own methods, preferences, and rhythms. The ocean, in turn, reflects this complexity, shaped not by a single set of rules, but by many, each unfolding within its own context, yet all contributing to the broader pattern of life beneath the surface. Learning in the ocean does not always arrive through sudden moments of clarity, but through repetition that unfolds gradually, shaping behavior across time until it becomes part of how movement itself is understood. Among orcas, this process begins early, not as a separate phase from daily life, but as something woven into every interaction, where young individuals remain close to experienced members, observing patterns that will later guide their own actions. Calves move within the structure of the group, positioned alongside adults as they travel, feed, and adjust to changing conditions. Their early participation is not passive. Even at a young age, they mirror movements, attempting to align their actions with those around them. These attempts are not always precise, yet they form the foundation of learning, allowing the young to begin recognizing sequences that repeat under specific circumstances. As time progresses, these observations transition into guided experience. During encounters with prey, adults often modify their behavior in subtle ways that create opportunities for learning. Movements slow, positioning becomes more deliberate, and the intensity of the interaction is adjusted to allow younger members to engage without the immediate pressure of a complete hunt. This controlled exposure provides a space where skill can develop gradually within the safety of the group's structure. Practice emerges within these moments, not as isolated exercises, but as extensions of real interactions. Young orcas approach, withdraw, and reposition, experimenting with timing and distance while adults maintain the overall flow. The process is iterative, each attempt building upon the last, refining coordination and control. Over repeated encounters, these actions become more consistent, aligning more closely with the patterns demonstrated by experienced individuals. Repetition plays a central role in this development. Behaviors are not learned through a single event, but through continuous exposure across different contexts. A technique observed once may not be fully understood, yet when it appears again and again in slightly varied forms, it begins to take shape within the learner's own movement. This gradual accumulation of experience allows complex behaviors to form without the need for explicit instruction. The passage of time deepens this process, extending learning beyond immediate interactions into a longer continuum. Knowledge that has been refined over years is carried within the group, preserved through consistent practice and shared experience. Older individuals, having participated in countless encounters, provide a living record of effective strategies, their actions reflecting patterns that have endured across decades. This continuity ensures that learning does not reset with each new generation. Instead, it builds, layer upon layer, as young orcas inherit a framework that has already been tested and refined. They do not begin without guidance, but enter into a system where successful behaviors are already established, allowing them to focus on adaptation and refinement rather than discovery alone. Within this framework, teaching is not separate from living. It occurs through proximity, through shared movement, and through the subtle adjustments made by experienced individuals as they include younger members in the group's activities. The distinction between demonstration and participation becomes less defined as both occur simultaneously, each reinforcing the other. Over extended periods, this process creates a continuity that links past and present, ensuring that the knowledge required to navigate the environment remains intact. Each generation contributes to this continuity, not only by receiving what has been passed down, but by refining it further, adjusting to new conditions, while preserving the core patterns that define their way of life. In this way, the transfer of knowledge becomes a quiet, ongoing process, carried through movement and repetition, shaping individuals who will, in time, become the next source of guidance for those that follow, continuing a cycle that extends far beyond any single moment. Beneath the visible form of movement and coordination lies a structure that does not reveal itself through motion alone, a complexity housed within the brain that shapes how each action is formed, adjusted, and remembered. In Orcas, this structure carries a scale and organization that reflects a capacity for processing information beyond immediate reaction, allowing behavior to emerge through layers of interpretation rather than simple stimulus and response. The orca brain is notable not only for its size, but for the way it is arranged. Regions associated with social processing, memory, and sensory integration are highly developed, creating a network that can interpret multiple streams of information at once. Sound, movement, spatial awareness, and the behavior of others are all processed together, forming a continuous picture that guides decision-making in real time. This integration allows orcas to respond to complex situations with adjustments that reflect more than instinct alone. Within this framework, problem-solving becomes part of how interactions unfold, When conditions shift or expected outcomes do not occur, behavior changes in ways that suggest evaluation and modification. An approach that does not succeed is not simply repeated without variation. Instead, movement alters, timing adjusts, and positioning shifts until a different result is achieved. These changes occur within the same encounter, indicating that the process is active, shaped by ongoing assessment rather than fixed patterns. Adaptation extends beyond individual moments into broader timescales. Orcas have been observed altering their strategies in response to changes in prey behavior, environmental conditions, and even human presence. These adjustments do not appear as abrupt transformations, but as gradual refinements that accumulate over time, reshaping how the group interacts with its surroundings. The speed at which these refinements occur suggests a capacity to incorporate new information efficiently, integrating it into existing frameworks without disrupting the overall structure. Memory plays a central role in this process, linking past experience to present action. Events that have occurred before inform how current situations are approached, allowing orcas to anticipate outcomes based on patterns they have already encountered. This ability reduces the need for trial and error in every new situation, creating a continuity that strengthens the effectiveness of their behavior across time. The presence of such intelligence alters the dynamics between predator and prey in fundamental ways. A predator guided primarily by instinct operates within a narrower range of responses, constrained by patterns that do not easily change. In contrast, a predator capable of learning and adapting can expand its range of strategies, responding to new challenges with flexibility. This flexibility introduces an additional layer of unpredictability, as prey cannot rely solely on fixed patterns to anticipate behavior. Social structure enhances this effect, as intelligence is not confined to individuals, but distributed across the group. Information gained by one member can influence the behavior of others, allowing knowledge to spread without requiring each individual to experience the same event. This shared understanding amplifies the impact of learning, creating a collective capacity that extends beyond the limits of any single orca. Over time, this combination of cognitive ability, memory, and social transmission shapes a system where behavior evolves within a stable framework. Each generation inherits not only physical traits, but also a body of knowledge that continues to develop as new experiences are integrated. The result is a predator whose actions reflect both immediate conditions and accumulated understanding, operating within an environment where change is constant and success depends on the ability to adapt. In this context, intelligence becomes a defining factor, influencing how interactions unfold and how balance is maintained within the ocean. It does not replace instinct, but builds upon it, creating a layered approach to survival where awareness, memory, and adaptation guide movement in ways that extend beyond what can be observed at the surface. At times, the movements do not carry the urgency of a hunt, nor the stillness of preparation, but something in between, a sequence that appears unbound by immediate need. Bodies circle, accelerate, and shift direction in ways that seem exploratory rather than decisive, as if the interaction itself holds value beyond any clear outcome. Within these moments, the distinction between play and purpose becomes less certain, each action carrying elements of both. Young orcas often initiate these interactions, approaching objects, other animals, or even currents with a curiosity that drives repeated engagement. They chase, release, and re-engage, testing timing and distance without completing the full sequence that would define a successful hunt. These behaviors unfold in patterns that mirror more structured actions, yet remain open, allowing variation and experimentation within a controlled context. Adults participate as well, not always intervening to direct the interaction toward a conclusion, but maintaining proximity that preserves the structure of the group. Their presence provides stability, ensuring that the activity does not extend beyond manageable limits, while still allowing younger members to explore movement and coordination. In this shared space, learning occurs without formal boundaries, embedded within the flow of the interaction itself. Encounters with prey during these periods often reflect this ambiguity. Instead of immediate capture, there may be phases where the prey is pursued and then released, its movement shaping the next sequence of actions. The orcas adjust their approach, altering speed, angle, and spacing, as if refining aspects of the hunt in fragments rather than executing it as a complete event. Each repetition introduces slight variation, creating opportunities to observe how different choices influence the outcome. Through these interactions, skills develop in ways that are difficult to isolate into single moments of learning. Timing becomes more precise, coordination aligns more closely with others, and control over movement increases. These changes are gradual, emerging through repeated exposure rather than sudden insight. The body adapts alongside the mind, integrating physical ability with learned patterns until the distinction between the two becomes less defined. The environment itself contributes to this process. Variations in current, depth, and the behavior of other species introduce complexity that cannot be fully predicted. Within this variability, orcas engage with changing conditions, adjusting their actions to maintain alignment with the group while exploring new possibilities. This ongoing interaction with the environment reinforces adaptability, allowing behavior to remain flexible rather than fixed. As these moments accumulate, the boundary between play and training continues to blur. What begins as exploration carries elements that later appear within more structured hunts, suggesting that these interactions serve as a foundation for more complex behavior. Yet they do not lose their open quality, retaining a sense of fluidity that allows for continued variation even as skills become more refined. Within the group, these shared experiences strengthen connections between individuals. Moving together in these less defined interactions reinforces awareness of one another's timing and position, building familiarity that supports more coordinated actions later. The group becomes not only a unit for hunting, but a space where learning and interaction intertwine, each supporting the other. Over time, the accumulation of these moments contributes to a deeper understanding of movement, coordination, and response. Skills that are practiced in fragments become integrated into larger patterns, ready to be applied when conditions require them. The process remains continuous, extending across different stages of life, ensuring that development does not cease once basic abilities are established. In this way, play and practice exist within the same flow, each shaping the other without clear separation. What appears as simple interaction carries layers of learning, and what becomes refined skill often traces its origin back to moments that seemed, at first, to serve no immediate purpose beyond the act itself. Within the steady movement of the group, there is a continuity that extends beyond shared direction, a structure held together not only by coordination, but by enduring relationships that shape how individuals remain connected across time. Orcas do not move as temporary associations formed for immediate purpose. Their groupings reflect family lines that persist, creating a stability that anchors behavior in something deeper than momentary need. Pods are often organized around maternal lineage, where offspring remain with their mothers for decades, sometimes for life. This continuity forms a core that does not disperse as individuals mature, but instead expands, adding layers as new generations are born into the same structure. The presence of older individuals carries a sense of accumulated experience, their movements reflecting knowledge gathered over many years, while younger members grow within this framework, aligning themselves with patterns already established. Relationships within these groups develop through constant proximity. Individuals travel together, feed together, and adjust to changing conditions as a unit, reinforcing familiarity through repeated interaction. Over time, this familiarity becomes recognition, allowing each member to anticipate the movements and responses of others with a level of precision that supports the group's cohesion. This awareness extends beyond simple coordination, shaping how individuals position themselves and how they respond when conditions shift. Long-term bonds are evident in the consistency of these associations. Orcas that share a pod maintain their connections across years, even as they move through different regions and encounter varying conditions. These bonds do not weaken with distance or time, but remain intact, guiding the group's structure as it evolves. The persistence of these relationships suggests that they serve a role beyond immediate survival, contributing to the stability of the group as a whole. Care within the group reflects this depth of connection. When an individual becomes injured or weakened, others adjust their behavior to accommodate the change. Movement slows, spacing shifts, and the group maintains proximity that allows the affected individual to remain integrated within the pod. This adjustment is not abrupt or isolated, but sustained, continuing over periods that extend beyond a single moment of need. The group absorbs the change, preserving its cohesion while adapting to new conditions. Observations have recorded instances where orcas support injured members at the surface, assisting with breathing by maintaining position alongside them. In other cases, individuals remain close to those that are ill or weakened, altering their own movement patterns to match reduced capability. These actions reflect a form of care that is expressed through behavior, integrated into the flow of the group rather than set apart from it. Emotional complexity emerges within this context, not as an abstract concept, but as something visible through interaction. The persistence of bonds, the adjustment of behavior in response to the condition of others, and the maintenance of long-term relationships all suggest a depth of connection that influences how the group functions. These elements contribute to a structure where individuals are not interchangeable, but recognized as part of a continuing network. Communication within the pod reinforces these connections, with vocal patterns and movement cues carrying information that supports coordination and cohesion. Each interaction strengthens the link between individuals, embedding shared experience into the group's behavior. Over time, this accumulation of interaction creates a system where relationships are both stable and responsive, capable of adapting while remaining intact. Within this framework, loyalty is not expressed through singular acts, but through sustained presence. It is evident in the way individuals remain together across years, in the adjustments made to support one another, and in the continuity that defines the group's existence. The pod becomes more than a collection of individuals, forming a structure where connection itself plays a central role in how life is maintained beneath the surface. In the layered structure of the ocean, most lives are shaped by the presence of something that hunts them, a constant pressure that influences where they move, how they feed, and when they rest. This pressure creates boundaries, limiting exposure and guiding behavior toward caution. Yet there are species that exist beyond this constraint, moving through the environment without the same need to anticipate predation. Their position defined by the absence of a natural hunter. Orcas occupy this position at the uppermost level of the food chain, a place reached not through size alone, but through a combination of strength, coordination, and adaptability. No other marine predator consistently targets them, and this lack of predation allows their behavior to unfold without the need for defensive patterns that dominate the lives of many other species. Their movements are not dictated by avoidance, but by choice, guided by factors such as resource availability and social structure rather than immediate threat. This absence of natural enemies influences how orcas interact with their environment. Without the need to remain concealed or to limit exposure, they move with a degree of openness that reflects their position. Their presence is not hidden, and their patterns of travel extend across vast areas without the same restrictions faced by species lower in the hierarchy. This freedom allows them to explore a wider range of conditions, adapting their behavior to different contexts while maintaining their role as dominant predators. The impact of this position extends into their social dynamics. Without external pressure forcing fragmentation or constant vigilance, their groups remain stable, maintaining long-term relationships that support the transfer of knowledge and the development of complex behaviors. The continuity of these groups contributes to the persistence of learned strategies, allowing each generation to build upon the experiences of those that came before. At the same time, the lack of predation does not result in unchecked behavior. Orcas still operate within the limits imposed by their environment, including the availability of prey and the need to manage energy effectively. Their dominance does not remove these constraints, but it alters how they are navigated. Decisions are shaped more by opportunity than by avoidance, reflecting a balance that is defined by access rather than restriction. Rare interactions with humans introduce a different dimension to this dynamic. While orcas are not typically preyed upon, human activity has, in certain contexts, affected their populations and behavior. Historical practices such as hunting reduced numbers in some regions, while modern factors including pollution and habitat disruption continue to influence their environment. These interactions do not resemble natural predation, yet they represent an external force that can alter conditions in ways that orcas must respond to over time. Despite these influences, encounters between orcas and humans in the wild remain uncommon and rarely result in harm. Their behavior toward humans does not follow the patterns seen in their interactions with prey, suggesting a distinction in how they perceive and respond to different forms of presence. This distinction reflects the adaptability of their behavior, allowing them to navigate new conditions without compromising their established role within the ecosystem. Within the broader structure of the ocean, the position of orcas as apex predators shapes not only their own behavior, but the behavior of other species as well. Their presence influences movement patterns, feeding strategies, and the distribution of life across different regions. This influence extends beyond direct interaction, creating effects that ripple through the ecosystem. In this context, the absence of natural enemies becomes more than a characteristic of a single species. It becomes a defining element of how balance is maintained, allowing orcas to move through the ocean as a stabilizing force, their behavior guided by factors that extend beyond immediate survival, shaping the environment in ways that reflect their unique position at the top of the food chain. Their paths do not form boundaries in the way many other species define space. Instead of circling a fixed territory, orcas move along routes that extend far beyond a single region, tracing patterns that shift with time, conditions, and the needs of the group. These movements do not always repeat in exact cycles, yet they carry a continuity that links distant areas into a connected range, where presence is not constant, but but recurring. Long-distance travel is a defining feature of this behavior. Pods have been recorded crossing vast stretches of open water, moving between coastlines, deep ocean regions, and areas of seasonal abundance. These journeys are not random dispersals, but directed movements that reflect an awareness of where resources can be found and when they are likely to appear. The ocean, in this sense, is not divided into isolated zones, but experienced as a continuous expanse where distance becomes part of the group's routine. The absence of a fixed territory allows orcas to operate without the constraints that limit other predators. They do not defend a single area or remain bound to a specific location. Instead, they adjust their range as conditions change, following patterns that may shift across years or even decades. This flexibility supports their ability to adapt, enabling them to engage with a wide variety of environments without becoming dependent on one place. As they move, their presence influences each region they pass through. The arrival of a pod can alter the behavior of species within that area, even if only for a limited time. Feeding patterns change, movement shifts, and the structure of local interactions adjusts to accommodate the new dynamic. Once the orcas depart, these systems gradually return to their previous state, yet the temporary shift leaves an imprint, a subtle record of their passage. This pattern of movement creates a series of overlapping effects across multiple ecosystems. Rather than shaping a single environment continuously, orcas contribute to many, each influenced for a period before the group moves on. The cumulative impact of these visits extends across large scales, connecting distant regions through the repeated influence of the same populations. In this way, their movement becomes a form of interaction that links ecosystems which might otherwise remain separate. Navigation across such distances requires an integration of memory and environmental awareness. Orcas must recognize changes in current, temperature, and the distribution of prey, adjusting their routes to align with these shifting conditions. Over time, these adjustments form pathways that are not fixed but adaptable, allowing the group to respond to variation while maintaining a sense of direction that persists across generations. Within the pod, this knowledge is shared through continued travel. Younger individuals experience these journeys alongside older members, gradually learning the patterns that define the group's range. Each passage reinforces recognition, embedding roots into the collective memory of the pod. This process ensures that movement remains coherent, even as conditions evolve, preserving continuity within a system that is inherently fluid. The lack of a permanent territory also reduces the likelihood of direct competition over space. Orcas do not need to defend a specific area against others of their kind, allowing different groups to pass through overlapping regions without sustained conflict. Their interactions with other populations tend to be brief, with each group maintaining its own patterns while sharing the broader expanse of the ocean. Across this shifting landscape, orcas exist as travelers rather than residents, their presence defined by motion rather than location. Each movement connects one region to another, creating a network of influence that extends far beyond any single point. Through this continuous passage, they shape the ocean not by remaining in one place, but by moving through many, carrying their impact across distances that reflect the scale of the environment they inhabit. Balance in the ocean is not held in place by stillness, but by a continuous exchange between species, where each presence shapes the behavior and distribution of others. When a dominant predator moves through an area, it does more than engage directly with its prey. It alters patterns that extend beyond immediate interaction, creating shifts that travel through layers of the ecosystem in ways that are often subtle at first, yet persistent over time. The removal or absence of a predator introduces a different kind of change. Without that influence, prey species begin to adjust their behavior, often expanding into areas they previously avoided. Their movement becomes less constrained, feeding increases, and populations may grow beyond levels that the environment can sustain in the same way. This shift does not occur in isolation, but begins to affect the species that exist below them in the food chain. As prey populations increase, the pressure they place on their own food sources intensifies. Smaller organisms, plants, or other foundational elements of the ecosystem experience higher rates of consumption, reducing their abundance. This reduction alters the conditions for other species that depend on those same resources, creating a cascade of changes that can reshape the structure of the environment. The initial absence of a single predator becomes amplified through these indirect effects, influencing multiple levels of the system. In contrast, the presence of a predator can regulate these dynamics without constant interaction. By influencing where and how prey move, it distributes pressure more evenly across the environment. Areas that might otherwise experience overuse are given periods of recovery, while others become temporarily active. This shifting pattern helps maintain a balance that supports a wider range of species, allowing the ecosystem to remain stable despite ongoing change. These effects often unfold gradually, becoming visible only through extended observation. Over time, patterns emerge that reveal how interconnected each level of the system is. A change in one part leads to adjustments in another, creating a network of responses that extend far beyond the original source. The ocean, in this sense, operates as a series of linked processes where no single action remains isolated. Long-term ecological shifts can arise when these patterns persist. If a predator is consistently absent from a region, the changes in prey behavior and population can become established, altering the baseline conditions of the ecosystem. Species that were once present may decline, while others expand, creating a new configuration that differs from what existed before. These changes can be difficult to reverse, as each layer of the system adapts to the new conditions. When the predator returns, its influence begins to reshape the environment once more. Prey species adjust their movement, reducing pressure in certain areas and redistributing their activity. Over time, this can lead to a partial restoration of previous patterns, though the process may be gradual and influenced by the changes that have already taken place. The interaction between presence and absence becomes part of the ongoing evolution of the ecosystem. The significance of this dynamic lies in the role that predators play as regulators, not only through direct interaction, but through the patterns they create in the behavior of others. Their presence introduces a form of balance that extends beyond immediate outcomes, shaping the flow of energy and resources across multiple levels. Within this system, orcas contribute to these ripple effects in ways that reflect their position at the top of the hierarchy. Their movement across different regions allows them to influence multiple ecosystems over time, each experiencing a period of adjustment during their presence. These adjustments, though temporary in any single location, combine to form a broader pattern that connects distant parts of the ocean. Through this continuous interaction, the balance of the ecosystem remains dynamic, shaped by forces that operate across space and time. The presence of a predator becomes part of a larger process, one that maintains the complexity and resilience of the ocean by ensuring that no single layer remains unchanged for too long. Memory in the ocean does not always reside in a single moment, but in patterns that persist long after the original encounter has passed. A route once taken without hesitation may be altered in later seasons, not because the environment has changed, but because something within that space has been recognized before. This recognition becomes embedded, shaping future movement in ways that reflect more than immediate perception. Marine species carry this form of memory through repeated experience. Encounters that involve risk or disruption leave traces that influence behavior over time. A fish that has once altered its path in response to a specific signal may do so again under similar conditions, even if the source is no longer present. The response becomes quicker, more refined, requiring less direct evidence to trigger the same adjustment. Through repetition, the connection between signal and action strengthens, forming a stable pattern. This learned avoidance extends beyond individuals. Within groups, behavior is observed and mirrored, allowing information to spread without direct exposure to the original event. When one member shifts direction, others follow, not only in that moment, but in future situations where similar conditions arise. Over time, this shared response becomes part of the group's collective behavior, reducing the need for each individual to experience the same encounter firsthand. In species with longer lifespans, this process deepens as memory accumulates across years. Individuals that have encountered specific conditions multiple times refine their responses, adjusting timing and movement with greater precision. These refined behaviors then influence younger members, who learn by remaining close and observing the reactions of those with more experience. The group, in this way, becomes a repository of memory, where knowledge is carried not in a single mind, but across many. The transfer of this knowledge does not rely on formal teaching. It occurs through proximity, through the continuous alignment of movement within the group. Young individuals follow, adjust, and gradually internalize the patterns they observe. As they mature, these patterns become part of their own behavior, ready to be applied in new contexts. The original source of the knowledge may fade, yet the behavior it produced remains, preserved through repetition. Across generations, this process creates continuity. Behaviors that prove effective are maintained, even as individuals change. The group carries forward a history of responses, allowing each new generation to begin with a foundation that has already been shaped by past experience. This continuity reduces uncertainty, providing a framework within which new experiences can be integrated. The relationship between instinct and experience becomes less distinct within this system. Instinct provides the initial capacity to respond, a baseline that guides behavior in the absence of prior knowledge. Experience then refines this baseline, shaping responses to align with specific conditions encountered over time. The two processes do not operate separately, but interact continuously, each influencing the other. In environments where conditions can shift rapidly, this combination of instinct and learned behavior becomes essential. It allows species to respond both to immediate signals and to patterns that have emerged through past encounters. The result is a form of awareness that extends beyond the present moment, incorporating layers of memory that influence how movement unfolds. Within this framework, the presence of a predator leaves more than a temporary impact. It becomes part of the memory carried by those that encounter it, shaping behavior long after the interaction has ended. As this memory spreads and persists, it contributes to a broader pattern of avoidance, one that can extend across species and across time, forming a quiet continuity within the ocean's shifting landscape. Arrival is not always marked by a visible approach, but by a gradual rearrangement of activity that unfolds across the water. Patterns that had been steady begin to loosen, as if the structure holding them in place has shifted. Movement slows in some areas and accelerates in others, creating an uneven rhythm that reflects a change not yet fully revealed. At the surface, the first indications may appear as interruptions in routine. Animals that typically follow consistent intervals between dives adjust their timing, lingering below for longer periods or resurfacing less frequently. The spacing between individuals widens, reducing overlap and contact, as if each is creating a margin that was not necessary before. These changes occur without direct disturbance, guided by signals that have already reached them. Below, the water column begins to reorganize. Layers that once held distinct levels of activity compress or disperse, altering the distribution of life in ways that are not immediately obvious from above. Mid-level predators shift their depth, leaving zones that had supported their presence, while smaller organisms move into tighter formations or descend into areas where visibility and interaction are reduced. The structure remains, but its expression becomes less dynamic, as if energy has been drawn inward. Feeding patterns are among the first to change. Interactions that once occurred with regular frequency become less common, interrupted by pauses that extend longer than expected. Prey species that would normally occupy open spaces withdraw, reducing the opportunities for predators that depend on those encounters. The flow of energy through the system slows, not because resources are absent, but because access to them has become more restricted. This disruption extends across multiple levels of the ecosystem. A shift in the behavior of one species influences those connected to it, creating a cascade that moves outward through the network. Fish that alter their position affect the movement of seals, which in turn influences larger predators. Each adjustment becomes part of a broader pattern, linking individual responses into a collective transformation. As these changes accumulate, the environment takes on a different quality. Sound becomes less varied, with fewer overlapping signals contributing to the acoustic field. Movement, while still present, occurs in more contained ways, reducing the complexity that once defined the area. The ocean does not become empty, but its activity becomes less apparent, as if it has entered a state of reduced expression. These shifts do not occur at the same pace in every location, yet they align closely enough to suggest a shared cause. Regions that are separated by distance exhibit similar sequences of change, each reflecting the influence of a presence that moves through them. The timing may vary, but the structure of the response remains consistent, indicating that the underlying process is not confined to a single environment. Within this altered state, the boundaries between areas become more fluid. Species that would normally interact at specific points in space and time adjust their patterns, creating new configurations that reflect the current conditions. The usual pathways of movement become less defined, replaced by routes that prioritize distance and separation over efficiency. As the presence continues through the region, these patterns stabilize into a temporary equilibrium. Activity remains reduced, feeding interactions stay limited, and movement continues along adjusted paths. The ecosystem does not cease to function, but it operates in a different mode, one that emphasizes caution and redistribution. When the influence begins to pass, the process reverses gradually. Movement returns to previous patterns, feeding interactions increase, and the layers of activity expand once more. The ocean regains its earlier complexity, yet the memory of the shift remains embedded within the behavior of those that experienced it, ready to shape the next response when similar conditions arise again. Encounters between humans and orcas in the open ocean unfold as brief intersections between two forms of awareness that do not share the same patterns of recognition. Movement slows, distance is held, and observation seems to pass in both directions without the urgency that defines other interactions. These moments are uncommon, scattered across decades of observation, and often characterized by a sense of restraint rather than escalation. In the wild, orcas approach unfamiliar objects with caution, adjusting their movement to maintain space while gathering information. Boats, divers, and swimmers become part of the environment in these instances, not immediately classified as prey or threat. The orcas' responses vary, sometimes involving circling at a distance, sometimes passing without deviation, and at other times showing brief, close-range inspection before moving on. These interactions remain controlled, shaped by curiosity without transitioning into aggression. This pattern stands in contrast to behavior observed in captive settings, where the conditions differ in fundamental ways. Confinement alters movement, reducing the range available for travel and limiting the complexity of the environment. Social structures can be disrupted, and the absence of natural stimuli changes how behavior is expressed. In such contexts, interactions between orcas and humans occur within a constrained system, where the dynamics do not reflect those of the open ocean. The difference lies not only in space, but in the continuity of learned behavior. Wild orcas develop within stable groups, guided by patterns that have persisted across generations. Their interactions with other species, including humans, are shaped by this continuity, which emphasizes selective engagement and controlled response. In captivity, this continuity can be interrupted, altering how behavior is formed and expressed over time. Attacks on humans in the wild remain extremely rare, a pattern that has been consistent across recorded history. The absence of such incidents suggests that humans are not integrated into the orcas' established framework of prey recognition. Their diet, refined through cultural transmission, does not include humans, and their hunting strategies are directed towards species that fit specific behavioral and physical profiles. This distinction reduces the likelihood of misidentification, maintaining a separation between observation and action. When orcas encounter humans, their responses reflect evaluation rather than instinctive pursuit. They adjust position, maintain awareness, and often disengage without escalation. This behavior indicates a capacity to differentiate between unfamiliar presence and known prey, applying caution in situations that do not align with learned patterns. The interaction remains bounded, guided by recognition that does not extend into predation. Research into these encounters continues to evolve, supported by advances in tracking, acoustic monitoring, and direct observation. Scientists study the conditions under which interactions occur, examining factors such as location, group composition, and environmental context. These studies aim to understand how orcas perceive and respond to human presence, contributing to a broader understanding of their behavior within complex ecosystems. At the same time, researchers consider the impact of increasing human activity in marine environments. Shipping, fishing, and tourism introduce new variables that may influence how orcas navigate their surroundings. Monitoring these interactions provides insight into how adaptable their behavior remains under changing conditions, and how their established patterns may shift in response. Within this ongoing work, the rarity of harmful encounters remains a consistent finding. It reflects a relationship defined more by distance and observation than by conflict, where two species occupy the same space without converging into the same roles. The ocean, vast and interconnected, allows these interactions to occur without becoming frequent, preserving a balance that continues to be studied with careful attention. In these brief moments of proximity, The encounter passes without leaving visible trace, yet contributes to a growing understanding of how orcas interpret their world and how they respond to a presence that exists outside the patterns they have learned to follow. In enclosed environments, the continuity of movement that defines life in open water becomes interrupted, replaced by boundaries that cannot be crossed and distances that cannot be extended. Within these limits, behavior begins to shift, not abruptly, but gradually, as the conditions that shape each action differ from those found in the wider ocean. What emerges is not a different species, but a different expression of the same one, altered by the constraints that surround it. In the wild, orcas move through expansive ranges, adjusting their behavior in response to changing conditions, social interactions, and the presence of prey. Their days are shaped by variation, by encounters that differ from one moment to the next, and by the need to navigate an environment that is both complex and unpredictable. In captivity, this variation is reduced. Space is limited, and the range of possible interactions narrows, creating a setting where behavior becomes more repetitive, shaped by routines that replace the shifting patterns of the ocean. Social structure, which in the wild remains stable across long periods, can also be altered. Individuals from different groups may be brought together, forming associations that do not reflect their natural lineage. These changes affect how relationships develop, introducing dynamics that differ from those formed within established pods. The continuity of knowledge transfer, rooted in long-term bonds, becomes fragmented, influencing how behavior is expressed over time. Environmental stress emerges as a factor within these conditions, not always visible, yet reflected in subtle changes in behavior. Repetitive movements, alterations in social interaction, and variations in activity levels suggest an adjustment to the limitations of the environment. These patterns are not uniform across all individuals, yet they indicate that the constraints of captivity influence how orcas engage with their surroundings. The absence of natural challenges further shapes behavior. In the wild, each action is connected to the demands of survival, requiring constant adaptation and decision-making. In captivity, many of these demands are removed, replaced by predictable schedules and controlled conditions. While this provides stability, it also reduces the need for the complex behaviors that define life in the ocean, leading to a shift in how intelligence and coordination are expressed. Ethical considerations arise from these differences as researchers and observers reflect on the contrast between the two environments. The question is not only how behavior changes, but what those changes indicate about the needs of a species that has evolved within a vast and dynamic system. Discussions surrounding captivity often focus on the balance between study, conservation, and the well-being of the individuals involved, recognizing that each aspect carries its own implications. Scientific understanding has been shaped by observations from both contexts. Captivity has allowed for close study of physiology, communication, and certain aspects of cognition, providing insights that would be difficult to obtain in open water. At the same time, these findings must be considered within the context of the environment in which they were gathered, acknowledging that behavior observed under constraint may not fully represent that seen in the wild. Field research has expanded this understanding, offering a broader view of how orcas live within their natural environment. Advances in tracking and observation have revealed patterns that highlight the importance of movement, social continuity, and environmental interaction. These findings contribute to a more complete picture, one that integrates knowledge from different sources while recognizing the limitations of each. The contrast between captivity and the wild remains a subject of ongoing study, reflecting the complexity of a species that exists within both contexts. Each environment reveals different aspects of behavior, and together they provide a layered understanding of how orcas respond to the conditions they inhabit. Within this comparison, the significance of space, social structure, and environmental variation becomes clear, shaping how behavior is expressed and how it continues to evolve over time. Even with decades of observation, there are boundaries to what can be fully known, edges where data becomes incomplete, and patterns resist clear explanation. The ocean allows glimpses into behavior, moments that can be recorded and studied. Yet much of what shapes those moments remains beneath the threshold of direct understanding. What is visible forms only part of a larger structure, one that continues to unfold beyond the reach of current methods. Research has expanded steadily, supported by advances in tracking, acoustic monitoring, and long-term field studies. These tools provide detailed records of movement, vocalization, and interaction, revealing patterns that were once inaccessible. Yet each improvement in resolution also reveals new layers of complexity, suggesting that the systems being observed are more intricate than initially assumed. The more closely behavior is examined, the more it appears to contain variations that cannot be easily categorized. Communication remains one of the most challenging areas to interpret. Orca vocalizations exhibit structure, repetition, and variation that indicate meaning, yet the depth of that meaning is not fully understood. Calls can differ between groups, carrying patterns that appear to function as identifiers or signals within specific populations. However, the extent to which these sounds convey detailed information or how they are processed by the receiving individuals continues to be an area of ongoing study. The possibility of layered communication introduces further uncertainty. If vocalizations carry multiple levels of information shaped by context and relationship, then interpreting them requires more than identifying patterns. It requires an understanding of how those patterns are integrated within the broader behavior of the group. Current research can detect structure and variation, but the internal interpretation of these signals remains largely inaccessible. Intelligence, while evident through observed behavior, also presents gaps in understanding. Problem-solving, adaptation, and social coordination suggest a level of cognitive complexity that extends beyond simple models. Yet, the mechanisms underlying these abilities, how decisions are formed, how information is prioritized, and how memory influences action in real time, are not fully defined. Observations provide evidence of capability, but the processes behind that capability remain only partially revealed. These gaps are not due to a lack of effort, but to the nature of the environment and the subjects themselves. Orcas move through vast and often inaccessible areas, limiting the duration and scope of direct observation. Much of their behavior occurs beyond the range of current monitoring techniques, leaving portions of their lives unrecorded. Even when data is collected, interpreting it requires caution, as behavior observed in one context may not fully represent behavior across all conditions. Scientific inquiry continues to address these challenges, developing methods that extend the range and detail of observation. Collaborative studies bring together data from different regions, allowing patterns to be compared and refined. Advances in technology offer new ways to record sound, track movement, and analyze interaction, gradually expanding the scope of what can be understood. Yet each answer tends to lead to further questions, revealing additional layers that remain to be explored. The limits of current research highlight the difference between observation and comprehension. It is possible to document behavior with increasing accuracy, to map movements and record interactions, yet understanding the full context of those behaviors requires insight into processes that are not directly visible. This distinction shapes how knowledge is built, emphasizing the need for careful interpretation and ongoing inquiry. Within this evolving field, uncertainty is not a barrier, but a reflection of complexity. It indicates that the systems being studied are dynamic, shaped by factors that extend beyond immediate measurement. As research continues, new perspectives emerge, refining existing understanding while revealing new areas of exploration. In this way, what remains unknown becomes part of the narrative itself, a reminder that the ocean holds processes that continue to unfold beyond complete explanation, inviting continued observation and careful study as each new discovery adds to a picture that is still being formed. Nothing in the ocean exists in complete isolation, even when distance separates one region from another. Movement in one place can influence behavior far beyond its immediate boundary, carried through currents, sound, and the shifting patterns of life that connect one layer to the next. What appears as separate ecosystems from above becomes, beneath the surface, part of a continuous network where signals move and responses unfold across wide scales. These signals do not follow a single path. Sound travels through water with reach that extends across large distances, carrying information that can be detected long before its source arrives. Pressure changes ripple outward from movement, forming gradients that can be sensed by organisms attuned to subtle variation. Chemical traces disperse through currents, marking the presence of activity in ways that persist beyond the moment in which they were created. Each of these elements contributes to a system of communication that operates without central coordination. Within this network, behavior becomes interconnected. A change in one species does not remain confined to that species alone. When a group alters its movement, it changes the conditions for those that depend on it, which in turn influences others connected to them. This sequence unfolds in layers, each one responding to the adjustments of the previous, creating a chain of reactions that can extend across multiple levels of the ecosystem. These reactions often begin with small shifts. A slight change in depth, a variation in spacing, or a redirection of movement may seem limited in scope, yet these adjustments influence the distribution of activity in the surrounding environment. As other species respond, the initial change expands, shaping patterns that become visible only when viewed across a broader scale. The network amplifies these effects, allowing local changes to resonate through distant regions. Shared survival responses emerge from this interconnected structure. Species that do not directly interact may still respond in similar ways because they are influenced by the same signals. A disturbance that alters the behavior of one group can lead to adjustments in another, even if they occupy different parts of the water column or operate on different timescales. The response becomes collective, not through direct communication, but through shared sensitivity to change. Over time, these patterns create a form of coordination that does not require centralized control. Each species responds based on its own perception, yet the combined effect produces a system that behaves as a whole. The network maintains balance through these distributed interactions, allowing the ecosystem to adjust continuously as conditions evolve. The network maintains balance. The movement of orcas through this network introduces signals that travel across these connections, influencing behavior beyond their immediate location. Their presence alters patterns that propagate through the system, affecting species that may never encounter them directly. The response is not confined to a single point, but spreads outward, carried through the same pathways that connect all parts of the ocean. As these signals move, they interact with existing patterns, reinforcing some and altering others. The network remains dynamic, shaped by the continuous exchange of information between its components. Each new input becomes part of the system, contributing to a structure that is always in motion, yet maintains coherence through its interconnected nature. Understanding the ocean as a network reveals that no action occurs in isolation. Every movement, every signal, and every response contributes to a larger pattern that extends across space and time. Within this pattern, survival is not only an individual process, but a shared one, where the behavior of each species influences and is influenced by the others. Through this interconnected system, the ocean sustains a balance that is both complex and adaptive, shaped by countless interactions that link distant regions into a single, continuous field of life. Survival in the ocean often depends less on direct encounters and more on the choices made before those encounters ever occur. Movement is guided by an ongoing evaluation of conditions, where each decision reflects a balance between opportunity and risk. Rather than seeking constant interaction, many species operate within patterns that reduce the likelihood of conflict, allowing them to navigate their environment with efficiency rather than force. Avoidance becomes a central principle within this system. When signals indicate the presence of potential danger, behavior shifts toward distance rather than engagement. Routes are altered, depths are adjusted, and timing changes in ways that minimize exposure. This response is not a sign of weakness, but a reflection of the cost associated with unnecessary confrontation. Even successful encounters carry the risk of injury, and in an environment where recovery can be uncertain, avoiding that risk becomes a priority. Predators themselves follow these same principles. While capable of exerting significant force, they do not engage indiscriminately. Each potential interaction is assessed, with attention given to the condition of the target, the surrounding environment, and the energy required to pursue it. If the balance does not favor a clear outcome, the interaction is often abandoned before it begins. This selective approach allows predators to conserve energy and maintain their ability to respond to more favorable opportunities. The calculation of risk versus reward shapes behavior across all levels of the ecosystem. For prey, the decision to feed in an open area may provide access to abundant resources, yet it also increases exposure to predators. For predators, pursuing a difficult target may yield significant energy, yet the effort and risk involved may outweigh the benefit. These decisions are made continuously, forming patterns that define how species interact with one another. Within this framework, dominance does not rely on constant demonstration. A predator that occupies a position at the top of the hierarchy influences behavior without needing to engage repeatedly. Its presence alone can alter the decisions of other species, encouraging avoidance that reduces the need for direct interaction. This dynamic allows the predator to maintain its role while expending less energy, relying on the responses it elicits rather than on continuous action. The effectiveness of this approach becomes evident in how ecosystems organize themselves around these unwritten rules. Species distribute their activity in ways that reduce overlap with potential threats, creating patterns of movement that reflect a shared understanding of risk. These patterns are not imposed from a single source, but emerge through the combined decisions of individuals responding to the same set of conditions. Over time, these behaviors become embedded within the system, forming a structure that persists even as conditions change. The rules are not fixed, yet they remain consistent in their underlying principles, guiding behavior toward outcomes that support survival without requiring constant conflict. Each interaction, or the avoidance of it, contributes to this structure, reinforcing patterns that have proven effective. For orcas, this dynamic allows them to exert influence without continuous engagement. Their presence shapes the behavior of other species, encouraging movement and redistribution that align with the broader balance of the ecosystem. They do not need to pursue every opportunity, as the responses they generate extend their influence beyond direct interaction. Within this system, survival is not defined by confrontation, but by the ability to navigate choices with precision. The ocean becomes a space where decisions carry weight, where each movement reflects an understanding of both opportunity and risk. Through these unwritten rules, balance is maintained, not through constant struggle, but through a continuous process of adjustment that allows life to persist within an environment defined by both abundance and uncertainty. At its most fundamental level, what appears as fear in the ocean is not shaped by emotion in the way it is often understood, but by a system of responses refined through survival. It emerges as a pattern of adjustment, where behavior shifts in ways that reduce exposure to harm while preserving energy for future action. These responses are precise, guided by signals that trigger change without requiring prolonged deliberation. When a stimulus is detected, whether through sound, pressure, or chemical trace, the body responds by altering movement and attention. Muscles engage, direction changes, and spacing adjusts, all within a narrow window of time. This sequence is not driven by panic, but by efficiency, ensuring that the response is immediate and proportional to the level of perceived risk. The goal is not to react indefinitely, but to reposition in a way that restores balance. Energy plays a central role in this process. Every action carries a cost, and in an environment where resources can fluctuate, conserving energy becomes essential. Continuous high-intensity responses would deplete reserves quickly, reducing the ability to respond when it matters most. Instead, organisms rely on short, targeted adjustments, followed by periods of reduced activity that allow energy levels to stabilize. This rhythm supports long-term survival, balancing action with recovery. These patterns extend across species, forming a shared approach to managing risk. While the specific triggers and responses may differ, the underlying principle remains consistent. Avoidance reduces the likelihood of injury, and efficient movement limits unnecessary expenditure. Together, these strategies create a system where survival is supported not by constant vigilance, but by selective and effective response. Over time, these responses become integrated into behavior, shaped by both inherited tendencies and learned experience. Individuals that successfully navigate risk contribute to patterns that persist across generations, reinforcing strategies that have proven effective. This continuity ensures that responses remain aligned with the conditions of the environment, adapting gradually as those conditions change. The absence of sustained emotional states allows for rapid recovery following a response. Once the immediate adjustment has been made and the level of risk decreases, behavior returns to a baseline state. Feeding resumes, movement patterns normalize, and interaction with the environment continues without prolonged disruption. This capacity to transition between states supports resilience, allowing organisms to function effectively despite recurring challenges. Within this framework, fear can be understood as a mechanism for optimizing survival. It directs attention toward relevant signals, initiates efficient movement, and limits energy expenditure to what is necessary. It does not linger beyond its purpose, nor does it expand beyond the conditions that triggered it. Instead, it operates as a precise tool, activated and deactivated in response to changing circumstances. The influence of this mechanism extends beyond individual organisms, shaping the structure of entire ecosystems. As species adjust their behavior in response to shared signals, their collective actions create patterns that define how energy flows through the system. Feeding, movement, and interaction all reflect the balance between opportunity and risk, guided by responses that prioritize efficiency. In this way, what is often described as fear becomes part of a broader adaptive process. It is not an isolated reaction, but a component of a system that supports life within a complex and dynamic environment. Through efficient response, energy conservation, and continuous adjustment, organisms maintain their place within the network of interactions that sustain the ocean. This understanding reveals a form of order that does not rely on constant conflict, but on the ability to respond with precision. Within that precision lies the capacity to endure, as each response contributes to a balance that allows life to persist within conditions that are always in motion, yet remain connected through the shared need to adapt. Long before any direct encounter takes place, influence can already be traced through the way movement begins to reorganize itself. No single point reveals the source, yet the pattern forms with a consistency that suggests direction. Paths that once overlapped begin to separate, intervals stretch, and activity redistributes across space in a way that reflects awareness without visibility. This influence does not rely on proximity. It travels through the same channels that connect distant regions, carried by signals that move faster than physical arrival. Sound disperses through layers of water, pressure shifts ripple outward from distant motion, and chemical traces persist long enough to inform those that encounter them. Each element contributes to a system where presence is understood before it is observed. Behavior adjusts in advance of contact, guided by recognition that has been shaped over time. Species that have encountered similar patterns before respond with movements that reduce exposure, altering depth, direction, and timing in ways that align with previous outcomes. These adjustments occur without hesitation, suggesting that the response has become integrated into the way perception is translated into action. Across different environments, these patterns repeat with remarkable similarity. Regions separated by vast distances exhibit comparable shifts in activity, each reflecting the same underlying process. The details may vary, influenced by local conditions and species composition, yet the structure of the response remains consistent. Movement slows in some areas, disperses in others, and reorganizes into forms that emphasize distance and separation. What emerges is not a visible chain of events, but a distributed reaction that unfolds across the network of the ocean. Each species contributes to the pattern through its own response, creating a collective shift that extends beyond any single interaction. The system adjusts as a whole, guided by signals that pass through it and by the memory of how those signals have been interpreted before. Within this process, dominance is expressed without constant action. Influence is maintained through the responses it generates, reducing the need for direct engagement. A presence that can alter behavior at a distance shapes the environment in ways that extend far beyond its immediate location. This form of control is subtle, embedded within the structure of the ecosystem rather than imposed through repeated encounters. The repetition of these patterns reinforces their persistence. Each time the sequence unfolds, it strengthens the association between signal and response, ensuring that future adjustments occur with similar precision. Over time, this creates a continuity that spans generations, embedding the influence within the collective behavior of multiple species. The ocean carries these patterns without interruption, allowing them to move across regions that are otherwise separated by distance. Currents, sound, and movement form pathways through which information travels, linking areas that may never share direct contact. Through these connections, the influence of a single presence can extend across a wide range, shaping behavior in places where it has not yet arrived. As the pattern settles, the environment reflects a temporary state of adjustment. Activity remains present, yet it is organized in a way that minimizes overlap with the source of influence. Feeding continues. Movement persists, but each action is shaped by the underlying awareness that has guided the shift. When the influence passes, the pattern gradually dissolves. Movement returns to previous forms, interactions resume their earlier frequency, and the structure of activity expands once more. Yet the memory of the adjustment remains, preserved within the responses that can be reactivated when similar signals emerge again. In this way, the presence that is never seen becomes part of the system itself, shaping behavior through signals that travel ahead of it, leaving an imprint that extends beyond direct encounter and persists within the ongoing flow of life beneath the surface. There are patterns that never require a visible source to be understood, only the consistency of their effect. Across shifting waters, behavior adjusts in ways that reveal influence without display, as if recognition travels ahead of presence and settles into motion before anything arrives. The ocean does not rely on spectacle to communicate change. It carries meaning through absence, through altered rhythm, through the quiet reorganization of life that unfolds beneath the surface. Within this system, dominance is not defined by constant action, but by the ability to shape outcomes without repeated effort. A predator does not need to pursue every opportunity when its presence alone can redirect the movement of entire ecosystems. Energy is conserved, interactions are selective, and influence extends far beyond direct encounters. What emerges is a form of control that exists within the structure of behavior itself, carried through signals, memory, and learned response. This changes how survival is expressed. Strength alone becomes only one part of a larger equation, joined by coordination, timing, and the capacity to adapt. Intelligence moves through these interactions as a guiding force, allowing patterns to form, persist, and evolve across generations. Knowledge is not held in isolation. It is shared, refined, and embedded within the actions that define each new encounter. The ocean reflects these processes continuously, revealing a system where every movement contributes to a larger pattern. Feeding, travel, and interaction all become part of a network that responds to influence in ways that are both immediate and enduring. What appears as stillness or absence often carries more information than visible activity, shaping the flow of life through adjustments that are subtle yet far-reaching. In this way, the deeper story of the ocean is not always found in what is seen, but in how behavior changes in response to what is sensed. Each shift in movement, each alteration in spacing, and each pause in activity forms part of a language that connects species across distance. The surface may remain unchanged, yet beneath it, patterns continue to evolve, guided by forces that operate beyond direct observation. As this exploration comes to rest, the patterns remain, continuing beyond the moments that have been observed here. There is always more to notice, more to understand, and more to uncover within the systems that shape life beneath the water. If something in this journey stood out, if a detail lingered longer than expected, or shifted the way these interactions are seen, take a moment to share that reflection below. And if this kind of slow, unfolding exploration is something you would like to return to, you can support the continuation of these stories by leaving a like and subscribing, allowing each new piece to find its way back to you. as the ocean continues to reveal what it holds, one quiet pattern at a time.